Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to be here to speak to you. So I only have 10 minutes, so I couldn't do a fair job at describing all the technical work that's happening at Hyperledger. Hopefully, you have plenty of opportunity to learn about the different projects during this conference and the next few days. There are plenty of sessions and representatives of the different projects in the audience. So I trust you can learn all the gory details of each product. At the same time, there is this technical steering committee, which is kind of a mystery. A lot of people don't seem to even really know what it does. So I figured instead of trying to dive into all the technical work, I'm actually going to give you some insight as to what the TSC is about, what we are doing there. So why should you care? So the technical steering committee actually plays an important role in the Hyperledger organization. There is you get the, yeah, thank you. Essentially, we are the body that oversees all the technical work within Hyperledger. One of the most important aspects of that is approving proposals for new projects and then overseeing the lifetime, the life cycle of those projects over time. So fundamentally, you can say that the TSC is about deciding what we do and how we do it. At the same time, and I will get more into the details later on that, you'll see that there's a limit to how much we can do on that front. And quite honestly, I'll break the big news for you, is the technical steering committee is not that technical in nature in practice, and there are some good reasons for this. So I want to say that the technical steering committee, as like any other activity within Hyperledger, is completely open. So there is a set of elected members, but we have weekly calls. We have a public mailing list, and anybody is welcome to join. Typically, we have like 30 to 50 people joining the weekly calls, and everything is recorded, and you can see the minutes, and the agendas are posted. And we welcome contribution. Even during the discussion, we don't limit participation from just the members. There are plenty of people who are part of the contributors to Hyperledger who actually participate and take an active role during the calls. We also use the wiki as a primary mean of communication. We actually moved towards using the wiki even more so. So all the issues now are actually recorded in the wiki, and we try to offline as much as possible the discussion to the wiki and reduce the discussion on the calls to basically decision making. It doesn't always happen that way, and sometimes, to kind of get the ball rolling, we still have to air some of the discussion during the calls. But fundamentally, that's the model that I've been trying to drive towards. So what has the TSC been doing? So first and foremost, as I was saying, its primary role is to manage the different projects. So during the last year, we have approved several new projects. So I have named them on the slide. Aries, Transact, Bezu are the latest projects that were added to the Hyperledger umbrella. You probably know that Aries is actually a spin-off of Indy, which focuses on the digital wallet part of Indy. Transact is basically a transaction processing flow engine that actually some root within Sawtooth. And Bezu is the newer addition to the big Hyperledger framework family, which is an Ethereum blockchain client. And we also have a new working group. There were some sessions dedicated to diversity. I'm not going to get too more into this, but this is another working group that's important. Part of the life cycle, though, is also to know when to say, OK, we're done with this. And so we've actually deprecated the first Hyperledger project called Composer. I'm not going to get into the detail now, but it was an important aspect, and we had to actually go through this process and learn from it at the same time. A lot of the work we have actually been doing, spending time on, is actually process-related issues. And it doesn't sound too exciting, but the reality is, if you look at the original charter of Hyperledger, it's very, very small. And so it left us with a lot of undefined process that we actually have to tackle. And a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to discuss these issues. This is not interesting. And I understand that. And one of my primary goals as chair has been to try to drive us towards closing all these issues as fast as possible. But you'd be amazed to see how many, how opinionated people can argue forever every single little issue, even though they first started by saying they didn't care. and so we are still trying to finish that process, and it's never going to really end, right? There's always new issues you have to kind of address. But so a lot of the effort has been focusing on the project lifecycle. So when projects come in, we have this notion of, projects come in incubation mode, and then there's certain criteria to graduate to active status. And then there's also the livelihood of the project as it goes through different milestones, like first major release and so on. I'm not going to get into all the details because I don't have the time, but you can read it all on the wiki page. Again, we have this decision log that was part of the things I brought to the TSC as I became chair last year, is a way to record and find all the points of discussions that we're actually tackling. One other aspect is the TSC membership. The biggest change is we have expanded the number of seats from 9 to 15 in recognition of the growing number of projects. And it was a way to hopefully get more diverse representation from the different projects on the TSC level. The last piece I will point out is the common repository structure, because it was the first of its kind, but I think it's the beginning of a trend that I would like to keep pursuing. One of the things that the TSC has been doing is try to define a common repository for all the projects. One of the problems we have is all the different projects work in isolation, independently from one another, and it's very hard for people to find their ways when they go from one project to another. So that kind of defines some guidelines as to how different repositories should be organized so that people can find their ways around more. So the thing that we haven't been doing is also interesting because it helps define what the TSC really is about. And one of the things that we don't do is actually dictate what each project does. And that actually, in turn, means that it's a bit difficult to decide, to discuss very deep technical issues that are broad enough in nature that impacts all the different projects, which is why, this is an ongoing challenge that the TS has been facing. We've been trying to drive the different projects to have more coordination, cross-pollination, integration projects, but in practice, that remains a real challenge. The advantage of the approach we have, which you often refer to as the greenhouse, is that you can have a lot of different experimentation, innovation in different fields. The challenge is there is also duplication of effort, and integrating different components from different projects turn out to be much harder than we'd like. There is even simple choice of which programming language you use is going to have an impact as to whether a project will be willing to integrate or not. There is also the fact that when we want to talk about technical issues that are, so in a way, the way we say it is the TSC does not have teeth. There's no way to force project to do anything specific, right? So we cannot say, hey, so-and-so, you should do this or that. Because at the end of the day, it's open source. People are here on a voluntary basis. They have their own agenda. They're each to scratch, and that's the way it goes. So I just want to give an insight also on what's going to come next and all the things that we're actually talking about. Some of this is speculative. It does, it's not a contract by any means, but so there is actually, and my vice chair, Dan Middleton, I don't know if he's around, has actually started this discussion last week on this, big idea of the TSC long-term agenda. Okay, so we've been tackling all these process issues that are important, and then what? You know, is there a broader agenda we could try to tackle? And this is an issue, as I was saying, that has been ongoing from the beginning, I would say. And as we have added more and more projects, in a way, it's become more and more difficult to have this kind of conversation in a meaningful way. Either you're at very high level and it doesn't really have much impact, or you actually dive into any specific project and then you lose most of the people because other than the project you're focusing on, it's hard to know in detail how the projects function. One other issue we're tackling is the DCO and pseudonyms issue. It has to do with basically managing IP commitment from contributors. I won't get into the detail of this. I'm actually surprised this problem has not been tackled in a more broader way in the open source community in general, because it's much broader than Hyperledger. And we've been trying to do something, but it doesn't actually work very well. So we have had to ask legal to help us out on this front. But finally, the one thing I wanted to point out is I think one thing that we can do as TSC is to help further homogenize all the different projects. In line with the common repository structure that we have defined, I think we can further define things like what is it to become a maintainer? What is expected of a maintainer? How are they supposed to manage PR? There is absolutely no consistency today between the different projects on how this is done. And I think, you know, we may not be able to actually dictate exactly how they do it, but at least we could define some default, some recommendation. Because in fact, a lot of projects, they come up with their own rules because there isn't any set, right? So we can help, and it would make it easier for people to also contribute in different projects because they would find an environment that's actually similar when they move from one project to another. And to finish, I want to point out again, so there is a vote for the TSC. We don't just get, you know, there by accident. There is a requirement to have been labeled as a contributor. So there is a different mechanism to be. The basic one is you have been the author of a commit to some repository of Hyperledger, but there are other ways, if you're participating in a working group, for instance, it also qualifies. So the election will be in the fall. This year, we've delayed the election to the fall. Last year, we only had like about 25% participation. We're trying to get more. And so we are giving more time for people to understand what the process is. And I'm really inviting everybody to pay attention and participate, because at the end of the day, the TSC defines rules that do impact the projects and how they function. So thank you very much.